and you're watching Arirang News, coming to you live from Seoul. I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and thank you for joining us. The finance chiefs of the world's largest economies met over the weekend amidst the backdrop of an escalating global trade war. Although they released a statement recognizing the current dangers, they failed to reach any sort of agreement on how to deal with them. Meanwhile, as well as a trade war, a currency war is also brewing. Trump has accused China and the EU of manipulating their currencies as the yuan and euro continue the slide that we've been seeing over the last few months. The question is, how will it end? And who will blink first? And will there be any winners left, or will we all be losers? We take a look at these issues with an expert in the studio later, but first we catch up on the latest headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Centre. Take it away, Devin.
Hi, Jang-ho, thanks. Reports have recently noted a lack of progress in North Korea's denuclearization, but it seems Pyongyang is now taking steps to follow through on the promises Kim Jong-un made in Singapore. U.S.-based North Korea monitoring website 38 North said Monday that new commercial satellite imagery show the regime has started dismantling key facilities at its Sohae satellite launching station, an important part of its ICBM program. The facilities include a rail-mounted processing building used to assemble space launch vehicles, also a test stand used for developing liquid-fueled rocket engines. 38 North says the move is significant. The launching station is believed to be the one Kim Jong-un had promised President Trump he'd take down. South Korea says it sees the move as part of the North's step-by-step denuclearization process. North Korea has been demanding that the U.S. agree to a peace treaty to formally end the Korean War before it'll go ahead with talks on denuclearization. But the U.S. insists that denuclearization has to come first. The Trump administration is also warning businesses not to violate U.S. or UN Security Council resolutions. Park Hee-jun reports.
The United States has once again made it clear that there will be no peace treaty until North Korea's complete denuclearization. CNN, citing unnamed sources, reported that Pyongyang is unlikely to proceed further with denuclearization talks unless Washington makes the bold move of agreeing to a peace treaty with Pyongyang. North Korea has been pushing for a formal end to the Korean War, which would act as a security guarantee for the Kim Jong-un regime. But an official at the U.S. State Department told Yonhap News on Monday local time that although peace on the Korean peninsula is a shared goal of the international community, it will not involve a nuclear-armed North Korea. The official said the current armistice agreement will be replaced by a permanent peace treaty only when North Korea denuclearizes for good. The State Department, together with the Department of the Treasury and the Department of Homeland Security, has also issued a North Korea sanctions advisory and enforcement advisory against foreign companies to protect them from violating U.S. or UN Security Council sanctions. It warns manufacturers, buyers, and service providers against sourcing goods, services, or technology from North Korea or hiring North Korean laborers that would raise revenues for the North Korean regime. The advisory does not add any new sanctions against Pyongyang, but reflects President Donald Trump's vow to maintain maximum pressure against the regime until its nuclear disarmament is complete. It says that businesses found to be involved in such acts will be penalized by the U.S. or UN sanctions authorities. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
The two Koreas, meanwhile, continue to work on boosting their cooperation. Today, officials from both sides are inspecting railways in the north as part of their agreement last month to modernize the North's railways. South Korea's Unification Ministry says they're inspecting rail lines along North Korea's western coast. Specifically, they're checking the section between Kaesong Station and the military demarcation line, after which they'll hold a meeting. Seoul is sending a 15-member delegation led by the chief of the Railway Bureau at the Transport Ministry, and Pyongyang is sending a 6-member delegation headed by a senior official from its Railway Ministry. Plans for the railway project also include modernizing those lines that cross the inter-Korean border. Yesterday, we reported on shocking news in South Korean politics that Justice Party lawmaker Roh Hoe-chan had taken his own life. Today, thousands of Koreans are paying their respects. A mourning altar has been set up at Yonsei University's Severance Hospital in Seoul. Some 3,000 people, including other lawmakers, have already bid their last farewells. Roh was a 3-term National Assembly member and an iconic figure in the labor movement and in progressive politics. He jumped to his death on Monday amid an investigation into allegations that he had accepted illegal political funds. In a suicide note, No said he had accepted the money but claimed there were no special favors promised in return. This morning's cabinet meeting was dominated by the record-breaking heat wave sweeping across the nation, with President Moon Jae-in highlighting the need to consider the prolonged heat wave a natural disaster under the Disaster and Safety Management Law. President Moon chaired the weekly meeting as temperatures in South Korea continue to break records, and with the death toll from heat-related causes now at 10 this year, according to the Korea Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The South Korean president urged his government to come up with a comprehensive plan. Measures, he said, should include drawing up a crisis management manual for heat waves and a compensation plan for damage caused by extreme heat. The high in Seoul just a few days ago reached 38 degrees, and today it's almost just as hot. With the entire nation now under a heat wave warning, our Choi Si-young has the latest.
South Korea is sizzling with daytime highs hitting around 35 degrees Celsius. The whole nation is under heat wave warning issued when highs top 35 degrees. The high in Yeongcheon, a small city in Gyeongsangbuk-do province, reached 40.2 degrees. Here in Seoul, the heat wave is expected to push the temperature even higher, and the weather agency advises people to refrain from outdoor activities. Health experts say that people should drink lots of water and stay hydrated. The scorching weather has pushed up the demand for electricity. According to the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, the maximum electricity demand reached a record high of 90 million kilowatts at around 5 p.m. on Monday, exceeding the government forecast of 80 million kilowatts. But the government assured people that it has more than 10 million kilowatts of stable electricity reserves. Choi Si-young, Arirang News.
The head of Korea's antitrust watchdog insists the country is not on the brink of an economic crisis, despite concerns that another big hike in the minimum wage next year could be a burden on business. Speaking to a local radio station on Monday, Fair Trade Commission Chairman Kim Sang-jo said challenges related to the wage hike would not cause a crisis because the government has lowered its economic growth target for this year to 2.9%, a goal it thinks can be met. Kim acknowledged that officials have not communicated well enough with the public or with the media in response to criticisms of the rapid increase in wages. They were raised once already at the start of this year. And he promised to come up with detailed measures next month to support small businesses in need. For one thing, the FTC has been criticized for responding so late to complaints that franchise chains have been taking advantage of their employees since the first wage hike earlier this year. There are concerns about how the trade war between the U.S. and China will affect the South Korean economy. But data show in the first half of this year, the country's shipments to China accounted for a bigger proportion of its exports than ever before. According to the Korea Center for International Finance, China accounted for 26.7% of all outbound shipments. That's more than its exports to the U.S., the EU, and Japan combined, which took up 26.3%. The think tank attributes the increase to more exports of semiconductors and petrochemicals, which shot up by more than 60% and 23% respectively. It says the trade war shouldn't affect exports too much, but it could cause that growth to slow down. I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines at this hour.
The G20 finance chiefs met over the weekend in Argentina, coming at a critical time when the global trade war seems to be on the brink of spiraling. They pointed out the risks and the need for further dialogue, but stopped short of coming to an agreement on what to do next. Our Koreoni has this wrap-up.
The recent trade tensions were the main talking point at the G20 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting last weekend in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The final communique stated that global trade and investment are crucial engines of economic growth, productivity, and job creation. It also pointed out that although the global economy remains strong, downside risks such as heightened trade and geopolitical tensions exist. The representatives promised more dialogue and action to mitigate such risks and boost confidence. The statement's tone was stronger than the previous statement released last March, which only mentioned the need for further dialogue. South Korea's Finance Minister Kim Dong-hyuk emphasized the importance of international cooperation to alleviate the impact of the trade war, especially when many countries are facing problems like high government debt. Kim added that developing nations are more vulnerable to trade wars and said each country should think about how their economic policies can affect others. The IMF also warned economic leaders about the consequences of increased trade tariffs.
It certainly indicates the impact that it would have on GDP, which in the worst-case scenario, under current measures and not taking into account most recent announcement, is in the range of 0.5% of GDP on a global basis.
Meanwhile, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said at a news conference on Sunday that he understands what the trade issues are and that the U.S. is trying to deal with them productively. He said that the U.S. had proposed that the G7 drop trade barriers between them and that the other G7 members are taking the U.S. proposal seriously. The original proposal was made by President Trump last June when he proposed the elimination of tariffs in talks at the G7 summit in Canada.
People are trying to make this about the United States and protectionism. That's not the case at all. This is about the United States wanting free and fair trade.
The weekend talks in Argentina come during an escalating trade conflict between the United States and China, which have so far imposed tariffs on $34 billion worth of each other's goods. 고륜이 아리랑 뉴스.
Now to further discuss the results of the G20 finance meeting and the ongoing trade war and currency war we're in the midst of, we have with us Professor Shin Donghyup from Kyung University. Thank you for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, what was not really highlighted in that report was the differences that were not narrowed between the leaders of the G20 there. For example, the joint statement didn't really address, have an action plan in place. The US and China didn't really talk as much. And the EU also, on top of it, called a tax on digital companies, which actually mostly attacks American firms like Google and Amazon and Facebook and the like. I mean, they still are not sorted out there. Can we conclude that this G20 meeting, didn't really have the results that we wanted it to?
No, I think they failed to produce very fruitful outcomes. As we heard just before from the reports, well, the finance ministers of major economies gathered together and they discuss about the seriousness of the trade war, which is, which was started by the USA, and the China and the European Union took the retaliatory action against the USA measures. So we are at the trade war. And everybody recognized that it is not good for global economy and then their own national economy, but they failed to find a solution to the protectionism and protectionist trade environments. On the top of that, we can find the big gap on the stance between USA and the other member countries. USA said that this is your problem, and that is not the USA problem. But the other member countries empathize that this is the problem, of the USA government, not ours. So I think they failed to take the first step to find a solution to this problem. And another one is that even the USA Treasury Secretary Mnuchin emphasized the follow-up measures which USA government will take. That is the so-called currency war, possible currency war. He even mentioned that the Chinese government and European Union member governments are right now manipulating the currency value of their currency values to bolster their trade. I think this is kind of some warning about the currency war between USA and the other major economies. I think on the top of the very protectionistic trade environment, if major economies started to take the very protective, the financial currency, start the currency wars, I think the global economy will be in a really, really serious problems. So I think I want to concern about this point.
You mentioned the currency war there. Mnuchin also said on Friday that the US would be keeping a close eye on China about currency manipulation.
Right.
Trump has, of course, accused China in the past, and very recently, of China manipulating currency. But of course, Chinese government have said, they're not involved. They're just saying it's the markets. What do you see in the current the exchange rates fluctuations that are happening between the US and China?
Yes, that's a very important question. I think the currency value is very important in the trade because, according to the USA government, the Chinese government and the European government are trying to manipulate the currencies of their currencies to minimize the impact caused by the USA government's very protectionist trade policy. Because as we know very well, USA government decided to impose 25% tariffs on the the steel products and imported from the European Union member countries and China. And then in response to such a very protectionist USA trade policy, European Union and China also took the retaliatory action. And then when on the part of China and the European Union, if they depreciate their currencies against the USA dollar, they could minimize the negative impact caused by the very protectionistic USA trade policy. So trade policy, protectionist trade policy, and the currency policy should be interrelated very directly. In this context, what I want to say is that we have to review the Chinese yuan's currency and yuan's value against the USA dollar over the last 2 years.
If we look at the graphic just right now, you can see that there's been a big dip down and a big dip up against the US dollar and the Chinese yuan renminbi.
Right. But the point is that, since the mid-June, Chinese yuan was depreciated about 5%. So Chinese government empathized this one. Look, we are making efforts, right? And also even Chinese government empathized that they do not intervene in the financial market. They do rely on the market itself. But this is really different from the USA's insist. USA said that, as I already explained, that to minimize the negative impact caused by protectionist USA trade policy, Chinese government directly intervened in the financial market, to depreciate the currency value against the USA dollar. But the USA government emphasized, look, from since our June 2017, actually Chinese yuan's currency against the USA dollar was going up, appreciated. So there are some differences on the stance of these two governments, but certainly we have to wait and see. But Chinese government emphasized that look at the current exchange rates between two major currencies. And European Union also emphasized that, we do not manipulate, they said they did not manipulate their, euro value against the USA dollar. But USA government emphasized that, no, you guys have, appreciate the currency value against the USA dollar. Depreciate your currency against the USA dollar. Because strong USA dollars certainly is a negative factor for the USA exports.
Let's look at Trump and the US reaction to this. Trump last week, he criticized the Fed for raising interest rates. Now let's put aside the fact that he broke with decades of tradition of the US presidents not getting involved with interest rates and the like. But his comments, it seemed to be centered around the fact that his concern was that when rate hikes go up, that they will be strengthening the dollar, and that will therefore cause the trade deficit to rise. Now this has direct implications to the trade with China and the currency concerns. Does his concerns hold water?
Well, before answering your question, I want to pinpoint this point. That is that, if Federal Reserve lose the credibility in the market, it could be more serious situation. We can see the more serious situation. That means that the Federal Reserve has their own voice in the decision-making procedure. In selecting their, in deciding their interest rates, something like that. But this time, well, as you mentioned, Mr. Trump emphasized that. I mean, he criticized the Federal Reserve decision. I mean, on the part of the Federal Reserve, it's going to be very, not easy for them to respond, because that if they accept Mr. Trump's suggestion. That is the way. Very difficult for them to keep the credibility in the market. So in the coming era, they will have serious difficulties in implementing new financial policy. But if they say no, they could not avoid some conflict with the USA president. So certainly it is not an easy question for the Federal Reserve. But I think that, according to the economic principle, for the time being, Federal Reserve cannot support the Mr. Trump's policy, because there must be the deflation and inflation risks when the support for the Mr. Trump's policy. To depreciate the USA dollar's value against the major currencies such as Chinese yuan and European euro. Because when they do that for the time being, it can be a very positive effect on the USA economy. But there must be very skillful consideration. Otherwise, they will face the inflation or the deflation risks. That means U.S. economy can be slowed down. As it was about 2 years ago.
Let's look a little bit at history, actually. So, as I understand it, the trade wars inevitably have lead to currency wars. It seems that way. And in the past, we've seen a trade war before in the 1980s with the U.S. and Japan. Can you explain about what happened there and how that compares to the situation right now with China?
Yeah, at the time there was G5 meeting, at the USA, UK, France, Germany, and then the Japan. At the time, the USA dollars, the currency value, USA dollar value was appreciated too much, about 50% more than the other major currency value. That means that USA economy got a huge burden in their economy itself. So at the time, the USA government emphasized that it should be corrected. And then the other four major economies accepted the USA proposal. Then the Japan and the UK, Germany, and then France, they devalued their currencies. Let me give you an example. Japan, at the time in 1985, one USA dollar was equivalent to 260 yen. But after 2 years, 1987, the Japanese, one USA dollar was equivalent to only 130 yen. So the Japanese, the currency was depreciated. Appreciated a lot. And then as a result of those policies, Japanese economy started to be slowed down because the Japanese exports lost their competitive advantages in the global market. And then after that one, there was so-called bubble economy for 20 years. So we said that we call it lost 20 years in Japanese economy, right? And so right now, the Chinese government is in the same place to the Japanese or other the four major economies participating at G5 meeting. So I think the Chinese government got some lesson from this experience. So I think that Chinese government will not take the same stance to the four major economies in 1985.
And finally, very briefly, we don't have a lot of time left, but South Korea. Amidst all this, how does this all affect South Korea, and what does South Korea need to do to try and minimize any damage to its own economy?
It's a very difficult question, but I think USA, Treasury Secretary even said that China will be on the list of the country currency manipulator, and then to make such a kind of decision, Korea could be on the list as well to divert the criticism from the China, because USA government is targeted China and some other major economies. So we have to make every effort prevent us from being on the list. We have to use all channels to to persuade the USA government and USA policymakers. At the same time, at firm level and the government level, we have to prepare for some negative outcomes caused by the currency war, because that if currency war take place, then our financial market, including stock market and then the financial sector as a whole, will face serious challenges. Then amid very protectionist trade environments, it can be a fatal blow against Korean economy. So I think it's not easy though, but we have to make every effort to prepare for the serious the conditions caused by the trade war and the currency war.
Yes, concerning times. Thank you for your time. We've run out of time, so thank you for coming in today and sharing us your insights.
My pleasure.
And that's all for now. Our Arirang news team will be back throughout the day with all the latest updates from Korea and around the world. Thank you for watching for now, and hope you join us again next time. Goodbye.